What is going on, guys? Jason Burke here, Styles Clash for Life, coming at you on YouTube, and today I've got another edition of The Drive-In, where I watch recently released movies and tell you guys whether they're worth watching, worth waiting for, or worth skipping altogether. This is one that I didn't know I was going to be excited about until I heard that it was going to be released probably at the end of the summer, and I harkened back to like 15 years ago when I first saw the infamous Grindhouse trailer. That's right, you guys know I'm talking about 2023's Thanksgiving, the feature film from Eli Roth that is based on the Grindhouse trailer between the Tarantino Rodriguez films like 15 years prior. We saw this really dark, grainy kind of 70s, 80s style Thanksgiving slasher that we all wanted to be a real movie, and it was just a trailer. And now finally, a long time later, we've got the studio release of the feature film Thanksgiving. Again, didn't know this was coming out until a few months ago. Excited that it was. We don't have a ton of Thanksgiving horror films out there, or at least not a ton of ones that take themselves at all seriously. But I will get to the credits and talk about the good and bad of this one, because there's a lot to unpack in this movie. This one was written by Jeff Randell and directed by Eli Roth. Horror fans, you guys know Eli Roth from The Green Inferno and the 3 Hostel films and the Knock Knock and stuff like that. Eli Roth, kind of known as a gorehound. He's definitely a hardcore horror fan. He's got his detractors and his fans. He's definitely a divisive figure. I tend to enjoy most of Eli Roth's films, even the ones that are a little bit more exploitation, kind of torture pornish, like the Hostel movies. I always tend to find enough heart and enough story in them to enjoy them and not feel like it's all entirely gore. This one stars Nell Verlick, I'm so sorry if I'm butchering that, as Jessica, Jalen Thomas Brooks as Bobby, and Patrick Dempsey as Sheriff Newland. And again, this is going to be spoiler-free. It just came out last week. I'm recording this on Sunday, so this just came out about a week or so ago, so I'm not going to spoil it. Everything is spoiler-free, but basically there's a Black Friday sale in the town where people get injured and destroyed in a fracas of the remnants of the greed of Black Friday, which then causes a killer to come back around 1 year later to kind of seek revenge for the events of the previous year's Black Friday in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which is the setting for the original Thanksgiving. And so we get this kind of Thanksgiving-based revenge slasher movie straight out of like a Scream situation. First things first, a big positive for holiday horror. Every holiday now has their genre favorites that you can watch every single year, and Thanksgiving, I think, has the least of any holiday. There's obviously the really over-the-top comedy, like the kind of B-movie, purposefully bad slasher films, like the Thanksgiving and like Poultrygeist and stuff like that. We've got a lot of those. But aside from like Blood Rage, which is a great... Is it 80s? I think it's 80s. Blood Rage being an 80s Thanksgiving horror film. Aside from that one, you don't get a lot of them that are kind of, taking themselves seriously, that are actual serious kind of movies instead of just the over-the-top. Now, there's room for over-the-top comedies, and there's good moments in those, and they're good fun to be had if you're drinking with friends, but there's not a lot of serious Thanksgiving movies that you can put on and watch as a movie every year around this time. And now I think we kind of have something like that with this movie. Now, granted, it does not take itself seriously during a lot of this. There is a lot of comedy in this, and sometimes more comedy than seriousness. But having a big-budget, studio-released Thanksgiving horror film for the first time since Blood Rage, and even that's more of a cult favorite, is nice to have that. The gore is a huge positive. Of course, being an Eli Roth film, you knew you were going to get gore, and we definitely got gore in this film. Now, there are some uses of CGI in this film, and they don't look great, but the CGI stuff is not held on for too long. They cut away fairly quickly, and they mostly use practical effects, which look really, really good. So while I'm going to take a few points off for a couple of the CGI shots that look ridiculous or over the top, most of this film really, really finds itself in practical effects with a lot of like body parts and over-the-top blood spatter and stuff like that, and it does so in a really positive way. To go along with that, another one that you knew Eli Roth was going to bring you, kills. The kills are really good. There's inventive implementation of weapons. There are Thanksgiving-based kills. There are kills that based on things you would associate with the Thanksgiving holiday. So you get moments to laugh. You get moments to think about how these weapons and kills correlate to Thanksgiving dinner and traditions and stuff like that. So silliness with the seriousness of the gore. I like the kills in this movie for the most part. They're pretty fun to watch. Like I said, couple CGI things, but for the most part, you're really going to enjoy those. The tone of this movie has a really nice balance. You guys have heard me talk a lot on this channel about horror comedies and how they usually don't get them right. And how, from my personal sensibilities and the sensibilities of those who like kind of lean toward more serious movies, you have to find the right balance. And a lot of times, again, nothing against Poultrygeist or Thanksgiving, but when you have very obvious CGI and very bad over-the-top puns and stuff like that, sometimes the comedy just becomes a comedy movie and takes away from the horror aspects of the film. This movie, while it does have a lot of meta aspects and a lot of silly dialogue and a lot of catchphrases that you're like, oh god, yeah, but at least they really fit in the tone of this film. And this film, while taking itself very seriously in the gore, some of the situations and some of the dialogue don't take themselves seriously, so you get that balance between horror and comedy. It is, yes, over-the-top graphic at times, but while they're spouting off some ridiculous lines or holiday tropes that make you just kind of giggle. So I think this movie knows exactly what it is, and it knows what it's trying to be. It can be a meta slasher while also being a comedy at the same time, and finding, for the most part, the right balance of the two. My favorite positive of this movie is the social commentary. We get a lot of things early on in this movie that are talking about consumerism and greed and money and the greater good, doing things for the wrong reasons, doing things to line your own pockets, focusing on the wrong things while putting the right things to the side. And those are big parts of things that push the plot early on in this movie. So some of the same things that I'll be talking about that make this a positive also make this a negative later on in the film when they're not followed up on. I really enjoy social commentary, and the only other time we really get a horror social commentary on Black Friday and consumerism like this is in the start of Krampus. If you watch the opening sequence of Krampus, when they're playing the Bing Crosby, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas in the background, while people are getting trampled and fighting with each other and beating each other up over TVs and things like that. We see a little comedic moment of that from Krampus, and we kind of see an even more over-the-top, even more visceral and violent version of that in this movie, which kicks off the movie hot and lets you kind of know part of why the killer or killers are coming back a year later to seek revenge in this movie. So it gets you really excited because you're going to get this really gory, sometimes really silly movie, but you're going to get social commentary, you're going to get life lessons, you're going to get some meta aspects of what's wrong with the world right now put into the story. So for this part of it, at least for the first 2/3 of it, it's a really big positive. It is again, poking fun at itself, but also giving a lesson to itself without being too preachy, which I really enjoyed. Then we get into my last positive for this. I just put fun. This is a really fun movie. A friend of mine and I went to see this, and we just found ourselves laughing a lot. We found ourselves laughing at dialogues, some of the well-timed puns, some of the back and forth with the characters, some of the gore, and just a lot of what this movie was trying to say. It's just trying to be a fun holiday slasher. Much like some of those later Christmas ones and some of those like 2000s Valentine's ones, it's just trying to be a fun slasher. You can put it on in the background, you can put it on with friends, you can go see it in the theater. You're gonna most likely have a good time with this. And again, it's going to give you something for everyone. Those that like meta references, those that like social commentaries, those that like gore and kills and stuff like that, you're going to have a good time with this film. And that's something that's missing from a lot of films like this. Then we get into some negatives, and I had a couple really, really big ones. Here's a big one. The characters in general of this film, while none of the acting is bad, the dialogue goes kind of both ways, and we'll get into that. But the main characters of this film didn't have a lot of likability around them. The main character was likable, and there was another friend character that was likable. But outside of them, you didn't really get a lot of other characters that were likable. They spent a lot of time trying to create some red herrings and trying to make everyone kind of unlikable just so they could all be possible killers. This movie is a whodunit. It very much is a Thanksgiving version of Scream. So it very much is trying to get you thrown off the scent of who the killer or killers are. And they spend a lot of time creating doubt in your mind because everyone is kind of unlikable. Everyone's kind of got motives because they're all kind of just jackasses. So you don't get a chance to root for a lot of them, so that when they die or when they band together toward the end, you don't really care. Again, aside from Nell Verloc, who I thought was decent here, but even didn't stand out as much to me, I had a hard time remembering who played who. I was looking up characters' names to take notes for the credits for this, and I was forgetting who was who and who was related to who and who was the main character. I was forgetting a lot, and that is not a good sign, especially for a slasher film when you want to cheer for characters to survive. That's a problem. I found myself at times rooting very much for creative kills and weapons and good gore over some of the characters, and that's not what you want for a film like this. The dialogue is another positive/negative because while it's not all bad and while there are some really fun moments, there's some good back and forth with the character, there are some fun punchlines, even some ones that are silly that I went, oh god, they didn't have to, but they did, so it was okay. But there's some dialogue that's pretty cringy here as well. Not always a fan of the dialogue, it's hit or miss. But another negative here, a big negative for me, and probably the biggest one in the whole movie, is the reveal of the killer or killers. And again, I'm not spoiling anything. It's still a new movie. Go check the movie out and then come back and we'll talk about it. But I thought the reveal was pretty weak. And I talked earlier about the social commentaries and the reasons why I think it was cool to bring up consumerism and like what Thanksgiving means versus what Black Friday means, and how we're all talking about being thankful and sitting around the table with our families to eat dinner and be thankful for everything in our lives and all our blessings. And then that night or the next morning, getting in line to fight people over a TV and being worried about all these things that are barely a bargain, that are $20 off, that we don't actually need. I love the idea of referencing thankfulness versus greed earlier in this film and then not using it later on. That theme does not represent itself later when we finally get to the killer or killers. And when the killer or killers were revealed, I had to look at my friend and go, was this person part of the first third of the film? Were they really around or not? And my friend couldn't tell me an answer either. Both he and I were looking at each other going, I don't really know. Aside from one or two lines they give at the end to give a reason, I didn't really understand a lot of the reasoning for this. They do give you a clear reason for why the killer or killers are there, but it's very quick, it's very succinct, it's down to like 2 lines and 1 camera shot, and you go, I had to think back about this character's involvement and how and why, and then I thought back about it and I thought, they could have done some really cool stuff with this, whether it was this killer or a different killer, they could have done some really cool stuff with that consumerism. We could have preached to the crowd about thankfulness. We could have given a lesson that could have made us partially empathize with this killer, which they tried to do anyway. In the reasoning of why the killer is the killer, they tried to give us an empathetic reason, which you kind of understand, but they could have gone a whole different route with it and made it much more impactful. They did something that was a very quick one-shot, one-line throwaway that felt wasteful to me, that I didn't really care about. And I would have cared much more if this killer or a different killer would have talked about, all the greed of these people and all these kids jumping in line and worrying about views and social media and worrying about greed over family and worrying about money over spending time with your loved ones and life and death and all of these finite things that we take for granted. Yes, it might have been a little preachy and it might have been too on the nose, but it would have been relatable current content that would have given us a reason to, yes, hate the preachiness of the killer or killers, but also made us understand and relate to it in real life as well. This could have been a really important film to have this message to top off all of the funny dialogue and cool kills and cool gore. This could have been a more well-rounded film, and instead the reveal kind of feels like, is it all just because of this thing? I don't really care about this thing. Oh, was it all thrown together? Was this person part of things earlier or not? It was very thrown away. And again, that goes back to the characters not being very likable or being very memorable for the most part in this movie. So I thought the last third in general, and this includes the very ending, was a little too obvious and a little too thrown away. But I thought the first 2/3 were very well done, and I was expecting big things out of the ending that didn't quite come. So that takes this away from being an instant classic. We could have expected a really long-term yearly viewing out of this film, and I think we still can watch this for fun every year, and it can still be a yearly Thanksgiving viewing of just more so funny dialogue, funny puns, funny weapons, funny kills, And it's a very enjoyable film, and I had a good time seeing it, and I will probably own it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, and I will rank it somewhere like 9 or 10 in my top 10 horror for the year, but it's not going to quite be the classic I had hoped because I didn't think that the reveals and the endings and things landed the way I would have liked them to, with enough resonance or enough importance, as I found myself rooting more for kills and gore over the moral of the story and the characters of the film. So I'm going to give this film overall a 6.5 out of 10. It's a fun watch. It's an hour and 46, and it feels pretty fast. Go see it in theaters. Watch it with your friends streaming. I think you'll have a good time. Whether or not the ending lands with you like it did not land with me, the first 2/3 were quite a good time. And overall, it's just a fun watch. You're going to enjoy yourself watching this movie. So 6.5 out of 10 for me. What is it for you? Tell me in the comments down below if you've seen it. Am I being too harsh on the last third of this film? Am I being too preachy by wanting a bigger, more important ending? Or did you enjoy the rest like I did and think the kills and the gore were enough for you? Please tell me in the comments, and please like, share, and subscribe if you like these deep dive horror review videos, and tell me if there's anything else that I've missed so far this year in theaters or in streaming that you would like to see me review before the end of the year. I'll be probably doing some kind of a top 10 Christmas horror films review if you guys want to see that, as well as my weekly Steeler reviews and all kind of stuff like that. So come back to the channel. Have a happy holiday. I hope your Thanksgiving was great and your Christmas is fun as well, and I will see you guys soon.